everyone. Welcome to the Cognitive Corner podcast. Today, my guest is Jamie Shopland, who is a community advocate and leader in Frederick County who has dedicated a lot of her work to improving support and accessibility for students and families. She currently serves as the chair of the Frederick County Special Education Citizens Advisory Committee, which I'm a proud student member of. And where in that she works with families, educators, and community members to elevate concerns, encourage transparency, and strengthen support for students receiving special education services. And Jamie's also a strong advocate for disability justice, inclusive education, and public systems that really meet people where they are. And she's currently running for Frederick County Council in District 2, where she's bringing those same values of community advocacy and accessibility into public leadership. And I'm really excited to talk to Jamie today about advocacy and how it looks like in practice and what it takes to build systems that really work for everyone. So, to start off, I would love it if you could introduce yourself and share some details, like anything I might not have been able to cover in the introduction.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Anvi. I am Jamie Shopland, and I am running for County Council District 2, and I am the proud chair of the Special Education Citizens Advisory Committee. And, I'm a mom of two children, and they are twins, and they're 7 years old, and they attend Centerville Elementary, and one of my daughters is a student with a disability. And so that is the lens that I bring with me into leadership roles as I take it on this foray of trying to represent the perspectives and the concerns and the opportunities for County Council District 2. And, I have been in Maryland for almost 20 years. And, I'm a proud product of public schools. And, my mom, I'm a mom, but also raised by a mom who a lot of times, had, 1 to 3 jobs. So raised in large part by a single mom. And one of the things that has really stuck with me since I was a kid was my experience in Girl Scouts. And what I learned in Girl Scouts was to leave things better than you found it. And that really is sort of my guiding principle in terms of how I approach public service. And it is something that I'm also doing for my daughters to create an inclusive space. I'm a troop leader for a Daisy troop. And so my impetus for doing that, not only to carry on the Girl Scout tradition and to have my girls experience that, but also to have other kids of similar age understand what it means to interact in a social setting and to learn the Girl Scout promise and the law and all the great things of being a Girl Scout in an inclusive environment where my daughter who has a disability can also participate.
Yeah, I think it's really amazing how you bring a personal lens into it, and that's something a lot of people may not have. So I think that's amazing. And I wanted to ask, what first led you into advocacy work around special education and disability support, and what challenges have you faced the most while you've been advocating for this cause?
Yeah, it really is. If I think over the last 7 years, because my daughter Marin is 7, she turned
Mhm.
7 in October of last year. And so over the last 7 years, we've been trying to understand what it means to support, a child that has a disability. Her diagnosis is ataxic cerebral palsy, and that really affects the communication in her brain. And so she has to use an AAC device. I've taught her over 80 different ASL signs so that she and I can communicate. And I credit my Girl Scout experience, my Brownie handbook, for getting me started, because that is where I learned the ASL alphabet. And I was able to take that and really use that with Marin to help try to build a communication structure for her. She has a lot going on. It's very difficult for her to get out in a scalable way what she's trying to communicate. But even before that, my half sister was a student with a disability, and she graduated on the non-traditional path back in Indiana, where I'm originally from. So, I think, as a society, we still have a lot of ways to go. And some of the challenges really are trying to take a systems view around this. So I was at a housing conference a week or so ago. And, one of the things that really struck me is kind of beginning with the end in mind. And right. So we have a significant population within Frederick County that is going to want to age in place. And we've designed all of these houses in a way that isn't going to be accessible thoughtful and supportive of what they're going to need as they try to age in place. So not just kids, but also, folks and who are aging and who are seniors in our community. So if we can, take a more systems view around making sure that we are caring for all abilities and that we're designing housing around that, that we are creating inclusive opportunities out with Parks and Rec. The City of Frederick, Parks and Rec's department, I want to give them a huge shout out because they've really stepped up inclusive opportunities for kids to have recreational opportunities within our county. And I'd like to see more of that. We have somebody on our committee, Anvi, who can't access public information because it's not screen reader friendly, or there's a challenge with getting the audio equipment that is needed in order for her to access the public forum in a way that meets her where she is. And so with that, as I started getting more involved in trying to advocate for Marin, I also applied for the ARC Maryland Partners in Policy Making class because change doesn't happen without, somebody having ideas and bringing people together around how we can do things better and to better serve folks. So the ARC Partners in Policy Making class, it's a year-long program, and I'm with folks like me who are parents of kids with disabilities, but also folks who have disabilities themselves. And so it's really giving me a diverse perspective of not just how to support folks like Marin as she's 7 years old, but also when she becomes an adult. Right? What employment opportunities, what housing opportunities might be available for her. And that's where I think the county council role is really interesting because, education is one piece of the puzzle that we need to solve for. There's all of these other things that encompass our lives, and to have somebody with that lived experience trying to affect change and make policy to support folks and meet them where they are is really what I hope to take forward as the next council member in District 2.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said about how over time living in Frederick, I moved here back when I was in fourth grade, and I think as we've grown up, I've definitely seen inclusion growing. I used to never see anything about inclusion in public events, but over time it's grown, but there's still a long way to go, as you said. And for listeners who might not necessarily be familiar, what exactly is CCAC and what role does it play in the school system?
Yeah, I appreciate that question because a lot of folks haven't heard about CCAC necessarily,
Hmm.
or don't understand how it works with the Board of Education. So there is something called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and that IDEA federal law is what is the safeguards, the protections, the rights of students with disabilities, and part of that trickles down to the state, and the state is required to have an advisory group of folks to come together around special education. So we have a state version of our local committee, CSAC, and the Frederick County version of that, which is created out of state law, is the Special Education Citizens Advisory Committee, and it is an advisory board that is intended to be cross-functional perspective. So we have 25 members, and we have students like yourself, we have parents, we have community members, we also have educators and staff, and then our role is to work closely with the school system, the Frederick County Public School system, to bring to light systemic issues that are facing our students with disabilities. So how can we better support them? What kind of continuum of supports and educational opportunities might we need? How do we make sure that we can meet children where they are in the spirit of what the federal law requires for students that have an IEP, an individual education plan or program?
Yeah, I think when it comes to CCAC, um, so many more people in Frederick County. I think I want to help more people know about it because even in my school, barely any of my teachers know what it is. And even yesterday at the resource fair, I remember a lot of people weren't really aware about what CCAC does exactly. They've heard of it, but they don't know what we do. So I think it's really important that more people understand the resource that CCAC can be to them. And yeah, I think it's a great resource.
That is one of the big things that we put on every
Yeah.
year is a resource fair. So we
Hmm.
brought together over 60 different vendors so that, families that have a student with a disability or educators or providers can come and learn
Yeah.
from each other and really continue to build on to this community. And one thing I'm super excited about is we're getting ready to have for the first time a recognition night for all the folks who are
Yeah.
championing supporting students with disabilities. And, our role is to provide recommendations. So
Hmm.
taking feedback from the community, from our members, and really advising the Board of Education and the Department of Special Education on how can we do this better in our county.
Hmm. Yep. And I know you talked about this a little bit earlier about like your role as a parent, but how has that experience of like being a parent to a child with special education needs shaped how you view the education system? And like, why is it important for families to have a voice in shaping education policy, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of parent voice, the parent knows their child the best,
Hmm.
and that's a really critical perspective when you think about the IEP team. So the way that this is all supposed to work, there's supposed to be a collaboration between the parent and whatever other supports and services are needed to support that child with a disability, and that's going to look different based on what the IEP calls out and what the child needs. And so for me, Marin has SLP, she has OT, PT, adaptive PE, she has a food feeding protocol. So we have a wide array of folks that are coming together along with her case manager and her teacher to figure out how can we best support educational outcomes for Marin. And having the as a parent and as I've talked to other parents, you just know your child best. You know how they behave, you know what they respond to. So making sure that that's well represented within these IEP collaborations is really important.
Definitely. Um, and so when it comes to like the stigma in like the special education system still and like in school systems, where do you think like the stigma exists like the most and like in terms of like supporting different learning needs? Where do you see it the most?
Yeah, it's still we are still using language that is not inclusive.
Hmm.
I just did a radio interview, and the person interviewing me was talking about like handicap and special needs, right? So this language for a while hasn't been the inclusive language that the disability community looks to use
Hmm.
as it identifies itself. So even just starting with language, and I find that in the school system too, right? We're not using inclusive language, and we're sort of still othering kids. And the other big piece of this is just making sure that we continue towards inclusion. The law requires the child to be in the least restrictive environment. So making sure that as we're thinking about how kids are interacting with their peers, one of the big things that CCAC has tried to advocate for is education for peers, the non-disabled peers of the students with a disability, so that they can better understand and how to relate, so that there's just more inclusion happening within the school system.
Yeah, I think like what you said about peers is like a super big thing about like that we should work on educating like the peers about how to treat those students, how to talk to them, like all those things. That's like a super big thing. And like that's something like I'm trying to do as well, like going to schools, like high schools, middle schools, and even as early as elementary school and just like making helping kids understand what's going on and like how to be respectful of that and also like not treating them in a way that is like I guess like you said like othering them like making them separated but like incorporating them and like interacting with them still. So yeah, that's definitely super important. Um, and then now I want to talk a little bit more about like you running for county council. What made you decide to run for county council and how does your experience with special education advocacy shape how you think about local government?
Yeah, I think a lot. I've been working towards running for an elected office for a long time. As I mentioned, being a Girl Scout, one of my core values is to leave things better than you found them. And I'm not one to sit still. I'm one to do something. And we have a lot of things that we need to do something about here in Frederick County.
Hmm.
And that's everything from there's a lot of growth that's happening in District 2. So there's a lot of change that's coming. And so although those development decisions have happened already to a large degree, I think it's really important that people know what's coming to the community and how the community is going to be impacted. There's a new high school coming. There's a new sheriff's facility coming. There's a large effort to do economic development around the southern part of Frederick County as part of the corridor, the South Frederick Corridor Plan. There's a lot of businesses that tend to turn over in Urbana, and I've heard it's because of the cost of the rent and those sorts of things. We have a housing crisis. There is a lack of affordable housing for people who are educators, nurses, firefighters, all the people that provide public services to us, and also those seniors that I was talking about earlier. We need to have more housing around transportation. So, where can we create these transit-oriented developments to make the communities more accessible? And so the way that I view, public service is really, how do we support the people who need the help the most? And those, to some degree, there's lots of different populations, but, folks with disabilities, I think if we are doing right by people who have disabilities, then that just helps everybody else.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And when you talk about like inclusion, like both for people with disabilities and like other people as well, what would a truly accessible and inclusive community look like to you? And what gives you hope when you think about the future of inclusive education?
Yeah, the thing that gives me hope is my daughter, who
Mhm.
has lots of grit and perseverance and doesn't give up as we
Mhm.
go through lots of different therapies and things like that. But also, it's communities like the Main Street apartment complex in downtown Rockville, where they've actually created a community where you have disabled folks and non-disabled folks, so people with disabilities and not, and they're coming together to support one another and to be a
Mhm.
community. And so that is an inclusive community. And it's also just as we try to solve some of these housing challenges, again, beginning with the end in mind. So what can we do in terms of how we design homes, smart technology that will make things easier for folks as they, might need to do something within their home. There's a lot of new tech out there that can make homes more accessible for people with disabilities, and that's helpful for everybody.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, and one thing I wanted to talk about is like as a student, I think sometimes like a lot of other students don't realize how like complex the systems are behind like education. And a lot of times like students feel like decisions about education are happening around them and not necessarily like with them in mind and like with their opinions involved as well. And being on CCAC has definitely like as a student member has opened my eyes as to like how much work goes on behind the scenes and like for advocacy and all those types of things. And I think like obviously being a student member has like been an amazing experience for me, but I want like other students to also get more insight into this and know what steps they can take to make a positive change in their school communities or communities in general. So if a student listening wanted to advocate for inclusion like in their schools, what would you say? Like what would you recommend for them to start? And in your opinion, how important is it to include student voices in conversations about education policy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of, for the people that are going to be affected by the change to have
Mhm.
make sure that they have a seat at the table. And
Yeah.
so there's lots of policies that are put forth that impact students, whether it's,
Mhm.
how you can use your device in the school or, what have you. So whenever, and a lot of what I do in my professional life is to help people move through change. And you
Mhm.
can only do that effectively if they feel like it's not happening to them, but it's happening with them, just as you said.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of work. You have to roll up your sleeves and you have to have conversations. You have to have focus groups. You have to make sure that their voices are heard. And there's so many opportunities for students to have their voice heard. And I would encourage students to show up to Board of Education meetings and provide public comment, show up to CCAC and provide public comment. There's a racial equity committee as part of the Board of Education. There's all kinds of committees and ways to participate in the public process. It's not always easy to help for students to know where those opportunities are. So talk to a guidance counselor, talk to a teacher, talk to somebody, a trusted adult, and say, hey, this is something I'm really interested about. How can I go about, getting involved in this? I was at the climate summit, and there was a student who ended up reading a poem at the climate summit. And so there's no shortage of ways to impact your community, and we need that now more than
Yeah.
ever. Young people getting involved. We need to know what you want, what you need, so that these policies, as we shape for the future, have your perspectives in mind.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. And I know you're involved with so many different things. Like you're running for county council right now. You're the chair of CCAC. You're the mother of two like amazing girls, and you have so many things that are going on. And I just wanted to ask like how you manage all of this. Like it's definitely super inspiring to see how you're doing so much for your community. And I just wanted to ask like how do you manage it all?
Well, calendaring is a big thing. So
Hmm.
making sure that things get calendared, but also, just having a good support network
Hmm.
around there. There's a core group of folks and close friends and advisors that are really helping, provide support. And, there's a couple of amazing like babysitters that have helped with the girls for things that I need to go and do while my husband is doing what he's trying to do. And it really is true what they say. It takes a village. So make sure that you find your village and that core group of people that have your back, that you can trust and lean on, because these things are not easy. Trying to make change is not easy. And there are, times where, it can get a little bit demoralizing. But
Hmm.
one of the best books that I have ever read and podcasts that I follow is The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. So that really is a grounding framing that you can't control what other people are doing. You can't control what they're thinking. All you can control is you and your response and the effort and the energy that you put into something. And, I sleep better at night knowing that I'm trying to go out and help other people and do things and leave it better than I found it. And so that's really what kind of propels me to keep going. And then, of course, it's so inspiring you and your sister meeting, talented, extremely bright students. And, that we are in good hands. When I think about the future and just things that you and your sister are trying to do with the Ray Foundation and, other ideas that you have that you shared at CCAC that I'll let you talk about if you want to. But yeah, I think, the grit and the tenacity and the perseverance of my daughter, who has a much harder day every day than I do, having a disability, and, just that core group of folks to lean on, and then young leaders like you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was an amazing response, and I'm so glad you could join me today. And I loved talking to you and hearing your advice and your responses to everything. And thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anvi. And if anybody wants to follow along, you can find information on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, jamieshopland.com, and feel free to reach out.
Yep. Thank you so much.
All right,
Okay.
thanks.
Bye.
Bye.